ghost, rise up to us. Edelvine ghost, rise up to us.
I hope you don't make me regret our decision to enroll you.
Thanks so much, Simon, for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about how the idea for Seance was born?
It felt like with my first film, I wanted to make a type of movie that was one that I specifically enjoyed as a viewer. And that had particularly inspired me as a filmmaker. And it was this genre of what I'd kind of come to think of as cozy slashers, slasher films that had like these kind of murder mysteries, but there was enough of a horror element to like kind of engage me as a horror fan, especially when I was a teenager, like watching, the slasher films of the 80s. And then, after Scream, the kind of 90s postmodern slasher resurgence. That was just kind of an era that I always loved those stories. And I'd always kind of wanted to make one of those films myself. And when it was time to kind of start thinking about what type of movie I could A, get financed, and B, thought I'd be fairly decent at directing, that was the first kind of story that I really gravitated towards. I tend to find inspiration in ways that I try to maybe understand after the fact. It tends to be, I just kind of, stories just occur to me and I get excited about them and then I write them and then I'm like, maybe I can make this in a film, maybe I can't. Often I can't. With Seance I could, and then you go back and you're like, what, why did I do that? Why did I think it was a good idea to make like a girls' school murder mystery supernatural slasher? And the answer is I just like really did grow up watching those films, and I think they shaped kind of who I am. But like I won't do another one again, I don't think.
Why is that?
Well, I mean, I think also I probably said maybe more than I have to say on the subject of girls' boarding schools, which is not something that I have any understanding of whatsoever. I was going basically on, fictionalized kind of dynamics. And also, I think, truthfully, I'm getting a little burned out on horror, having done VHS 94 and Seance back to back. I don't want to get to the point where I'm approaching my stories or characters in a cynical way. And I think if you work in a genre for kind of too long, it's hard to not get repetitive. So I do kind of want to take a break from horror, which fortunately, Adam Wingard and I are working on a bunch of projects in a bunch of different genres right now. So I am kind of refreshing. But it's also, it's true. I felt like between Seance and VHS 94, I was in a really like horror mindset for a while of like trying to be spooky. And now I'm kind of like, well, like okay, that was fun, but I probably shouldn't just keep doing that, or the results will diminish. The next time I conceive a horror story, I hope that I'm approaching it in a very different way, just because I think you never really want to repeat yourself. If you're fortunate enough to be able to kind of make a living being creative, like you always want to be trying to do something, very different, I think, with every film in a way, as long as you're entertaining people and delivering on their expectations to an extent.
We had Adam Wingard on the podcast actually earlier this year talking about Godzilla versus Kong. How did you guys come to realize that you work so well together?
In retrospect, it's really obvious that but I think even at the time we kind of had a bit of like, we were friends, but we also did have this bit of like, hey, you're good at the stuff I'm not, we should make a film together. We just stayed friends and hung out over the years. And after Adam moved out to LA, we were able to go see, movies and talk about things like Faceoff, just as fans, which now years later, we're getting to kind of explore that narrative world ourselves, which is like a dream. Adam, I think, had a lot of confidence as a visual filmmaker. And I think Adam is one of the best film editors I've ever met. But I think he didn't really feel a lot of confidence as a writer. And at that time, I was like, well, I'm getting pretty good as a writer, but I don't know how to shoot video like you do. If I have a low budget, I'm going to make a movie that looks like unreleasable crap. Whereas if you have a low budget, you're going to make something that is actually beautiful. So let's make a movie together. Now, Adam and I tend to be co-writing things, which is a lot of fun, but a different process than the previous one. So, but I mean, I kind of think that's necessary. Every project should be a different process. And the fact that we've been able to evolve and do different projects, but keep kind of coming back to collaborating has been really great. We're very lucky. I'm very lucky to be able to work with someone who I actually get along with.
Yeah, and now you've got Thundercats and Faceoff sequel, as you mentioned, which are just two completely different projects. You couldn't get two more different projects. Where are they each at in the sort of process?
Still in the very early stages on both of those. We're still at like conceiving the script stages on both of those. I mean, they're both they both, are going to take time to get right. Neither one of those is something that, you can just like rush off and do. There's a lot of money and a lot of like fans, and you want to make sure that you're respecting that, but also being original and creative. And so I think it's going to take a little while. So we're still in very, very early script phases on both those projects, years away. So I look forward to answering this question for a long, long time. But we're working on it. We'll get them done as soon as we can.
And with a project like Face Off, are you writing with obviously John Travolta and Nicolas Cage in mind, whether or not they come on board?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are writing with John Travolta and Nicolas Cage in mind, whether or not they come on board. I mean, look, I the answer, the bigger answer to that question is that was the only way Adam and I really wanted to do Face Off. When we first started talking to the producers on that project, Neil Moritz and Toby Asher, and talking to the executives at Paramount, I think they were thinking more of kind of a reboot remake of Face Off. Let's take the central conceit and apply it to like a totally different story. And that maybe is interesting, and maybe they should do that eventually. But that wasn't the film that that Adam and I really wanted as Face Off fans. We felt that Face Off was really about those characters, and we wanted to explore them further and ideally in further insane dynamics and complicated ways. And so when you're writing pre-existing characters and you're kind of trying to find like what was John Travolta's voice as Sean Archer, what was Nicolas Cage's voice as Castor Troy, but then once you kind of lock into that cadence, it's a lot of fun to be writing new lines for Castor Troy and Sean Archer.
They're so iconic, and I think people are really excited to see them back in those roles if they sign off. So hopefully it comes off.
Well, all we can say is that we're trying to give them both some really fun scenes and really fun roles to play, and that will entice them so they won't be able to say no.
So getting back to Seance, personally, why do you think myths and legends fascinate audiences? I really felt Candyman vibes in the opening of this film with the girls in front of the mirror.
Scary stories, ghosts. Like I think there's always that sense from like a very early stage as a human. You have that awareness of your mortality. You have that awareness that the world is kind of a scary, dark place. And I think we do kind of try to understand that through, telling each other scary stories. Candyman, was Clive Barker's story, The Forbidden, I think was riffing probably on the Bloody Mary legend. First and foremost, I don't know if that's a thing in Australia, but here in America, Bloody Mary, saying Bloody Mary in front of the mirror is the thing that kids did when I was young. I think that's a catharsis for our actual genuine like understanding and terror of death, and our understanding that that we will die and people we know will die, and we try to find kind of safe catharsis for that in those stories. And especially if you are young, and you have encountered death, I think you then are more drawn than ever towards that sort of material. And I think there is kind of almost a therapeutic process of being a human, through like roller coaster rides that give you the terror of death but don't kill you. You do kind of process your understanding of your own mortality through such experiences, and I think the horror genre kind of lends itself to that. So the urban legends of it all, and the kids doing seances and playing with Ouija boards and stuff, I guess I would assume that that's just like the inherent terror of being alive, manifesting itself in a more accessible, enjoyable way.
Do you have any ghost stories yourself?
No, Adam's the guy for ghost stories. Adam has a bunch of great ghost stories. I have none. I'm not like a ghost atheist. I totally am willing to accept that, there's some kind of life after death, and if something goes wrong, maybe it can hang out here and creep you out for a bit. But I don't really understand like what ghosts do, and if they have anything to say to me, they've neglected to say it, and and maybe that's fine.
So what is it about the horror genre that gets your creative juices flowing, or did before you were burnt out on this film?
There's the horror. I hate it. I don't know. I guess it goes back to that kind of like what we were talking about with like urban legends, and as a child, I was always attracted to just scary material, and it's funny because I don't know if that was just, again, catharsis for kind of real life fears or just my own personal sensibility. But when you're a kid, at least with a horror movie, like stuff's gonna happen. Like if you're rolling the dice at the video store and something's got a schlocky cover, you're like, well, how bad can this really be? And the answer if you're dealing with a horror movie is only so bad. If you're dealing with a comedy, the floor is even lower because there's nothing you can laugh at in a bad comedy, whereas a bad horror movie is hysterical. So so you're always, so there's this like win-win as a viewer kind of, and I don't know, I ultimately I just think the horror genre is one that I will always gravitate to as a fan because of my personal sensibility, but as a filmmaker I think it's an immensely gratifying genre to work in, because as long as you kind of adhere to a certain degree of audience expectations and deliver a certain amount of what people kind of want from your film, you can be fairly strange and subversive and weird, and audiences will be down for it. It's one of the genres that you can experiment within narratively and tonally, and just get away with it. In fact, people will, in the case of some of our films, completely ignore it, which is more than you want to get away with it. But it's a fine line.
To wrap up, is there a movie on your bucket list or something that hasn't been made yet that you'd like to make?
A lot of movies that I would like to make, but they're mostly all my original scripts, so they'd be of no interest to anyone. I definitely have a half dozen original scripts that Adam and I have been struggling to get made for a while, and some of which we're really passionate about. In terms of like existing properties, I kind of feel like I'm already working on my dream project a little bit, so I kind of don't want to be greedy and say like, oh, and next you should give me this. Because the truth is, I think fans were pretty annoyed with my Blair Witch sequel, and justly might have some cynicism towards me, working in the field of their beloved properties. So I'll wait until I have a success before I ask for anything else.
I actually think that the tide is turning at the moment in terms of the film industry, and people are hungry for original projects. The last, I don't know, decade or so has just been remakes and reimaginings, if you will. But I think people are really hungry for original films now.
I happen to very strongly agree with you there, Lee, but I will tell you that people are not hungry to finance original films right now. So
right.
That's the hurdle that we need to get over, is we need to convince the people with money who greenlight films that there is in fact an appetite for that.
Oh, well, best of luck to you for that. And we look forward to seeing the Thundercats and Faceoff sequel. Can't wait.
Thank you so much.